Have you ever noticed how some of the most intelligent people you know, the ones who can solve complex equations or, quote, obscure philosophers, sometimes believe things that make absolutely no sense? It's easy to assume that intelligence acts like a mental shield, a kind of built-in safeguard against foolishness, bias, or delusion. But the truth is much messier. Take Linus Pauling, for example. One of the few people in history to win 2 unshared Nobel Prizes. He revolutionized chemistry, helped develop quantum theories of the chemical bond. He was brilliant by every academic standard. And then, near the end of his life, he became obsessed with vitamin C. He insisted that megadoses could cure cancer, prevent colds, maybe even extend life itself. He published books, gave speeches, refused to acknowledge mounting scientific criticism. It didn't matter that clinical trials disproved his claims. His mind had already committed, and he's not alone. Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes, the most rational fictional detective ever written, spent years defending seances and spiritualism. He believed people could speak with the dead. And at one point, he even argued that photographs of fairies in a garden were authentic. This is the paradox. How can people so capable of logical, abstract thinking fall for such flawed ideas? And why do they often believe those ideas with even more confidence than others? What's going on here isn't just irony. It reveals something deeper about how the human mind works. Because intelligence, at least the way we usually think of it, is not the same as truth-seeking. Being smart doesn't guarantee that someone is grounded in reality. In fact, it often means they're better at building complex justifications for what they already want to believe. It's not a bug, it's a feature. A clever brain is a powerful tool, but it's also a powerful weapon. And like any weapon, it depends on who's wielding it and for what purpose. This video isn't about mocking smart people. It's about understanding how intelligence can go wrong and how some of the most intelligent minds throughout history have used their abilities, not to question their assumptions, but to defend them more skillfully. We'll explore the difference between intelligence and rationality, why smart people are often more vulnerable to motivated reasoning, and how ego, ideology, and social identity can turn brilliance into blindness. Because in the end, the real danger isn't stupidity, it's misplaced confidence, powered by a mind sharp enough to cut through reality, but not humble enough to question its own blade. So we end up with brilliant people who can build rockets, program AI, publish papers, and still hold deeply flawed worldviews, because they never learned the one thing intelligence can't teach on its own: how to think about their own thinking. And that's where the illusion begins. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. The smarter you are, the more likely you are to fall into these traps. The next part reveals how intelligence isn't just vulnerable to bias, it actively protects it. Stay until the end. What you'll learn might permanently change the way you see your own mind. Why do smart people defend bad ideas so fiercely? Why does evidence sometimes make them dig in deeper, not rethink? The answer is something psychologists call motivated reasoning. It means we don't use our intelligence to find the truth. We use it to protect what we already believe. Here's how it works. You hear a piece of information. Your brain doesn't ask, "Is this true?" It asks, "Does this align with what I already believe?" If it does, you accept it easily. If it doesn't, your defenses kick in. You poke holes in it. You look for flaws. You discredit the source, not because it's wrong, but because it threatens your worldview. And the smarter you are, the better you are at this game. In one famous study at Yale, researchers gave people data about gun control. Some data suggested it reduced crime. Some data suggested it didn't. When the topic was neutral, like skin cream or sports programs, Smart people analyzed the data more accurately. But when the topic was politically charged, those same smart people interpreted the data in a way that supported their prior beliefs. The higher their cognitive ability, the more biased they became. Why? Because intelligence becomes a tool of self-protection. The brain isn't a neutral processor. It's a lawyer, not a judge. It works for your identity. And motivated reasoning isn't just about politics or science. It shows up in everyday life. A parent believes their child is gifted. A partner is convinced their relationship is perfect. A CEO believes their product will succeed. And when reality starts to challenge that belief, the mind works overtime to dismiss, distort, or deny. This is especially true for intelligent people. They've spent their lives being praised for being right. They're used to winning arguments. They often equate changing their mind with losing status. So when their beliefs are challenged, their instinct isn't curiosity, it's defense. And that defense becomes more sophisticated. The smarter they are, they find complex explanations. They cherry-pick obscure data. They build an entire fortress of logic around a flawed foundation to an outsider. It sounds impressive, but it's just intellectual armor, protecting a belief they were never willing to examine. This is why intelligence alone isn't enough, because unless you've trained your mind to serve truth, not ego, you'll use your brilliance to blind yourself. And the smarter you are, the easier it becomes to lie to yourself convincingly. Intelligence isn't just a mental ability. For many people, it becomes part of their identity. From an early age, smart individuals are told they're different. They're praised for their quick thinking, deep insight, sharp memory. They're called gifted, talented, exceptional. And over time, those labels start to stick. Being smart becomes more than what they do. It becomes who they are. And when that happens, being wrong doesn't feel like a mistake. It feels like a threat to the self. Think about it. If your entire identity is built on being intelligent, what happens when you're confronted with a flaw in your reasoning? Or when you realize you've believed something false for years? For many, the answer is simple. You resist, not because you're arrogant, but because admitting error would shake the very foundation of how you see yourself. There's a psychological term for this: ego threat. When people feel their self-concept is under attack, they don't become more open, they become more defensive. And smart people, especially those who've been rewarded for being right their whole lives, are especially vulnerable to this. It's the hidden cost of praise. The more you're affirmed for your intellect, the more pressure there is to maintain that image. You stop asking, "Is this true?" and start asking, "How will this make me look?" And that's where the real danger begins. Because now, it's not just about defending a belief, it's about protecting a sense of self. And the smarter someone is, the more resources they have to do it. They'll build airtight arguments. They'll dismiss critics as uninformed. They'll twist logic to make it fit their identity. Not consciously, but skillfully. One tragic example is William Shockley, a Nobel-winning physicist whose groundbreaking work helped launch the digital age. But later in life, he devoted himself to defending racist theories about intelligence. He wasn't operating from ignorance. He was using his genius to justify a belief that aligned with his ego. He needed to be not just right, but exceptional. And he couldn't tolerate the idea that his views might be flawed. This isn't rare. Many intelligent people attach their self-worth to their mental prowess. And once your intellect becomes your identity, your beliefs become untouchable. But real wisdom doesn't come from protecting your ego. It comes from being able to say, "I was wrong," because it's not your ideas that define your intelligence. It's your willingness to question them. This isn't easy to hear, but these are the uncomfortable truths. No one tells the intellectually gifted that intelligence without humility becomes a prison. And we're just getting to the most dangerous part. Intelligence often leads people into elite circles, universities, think tanks, research labs, high-end startups, places where the smartest minds gather. And on the surface, that should be a good thing. Brilliant people learning from each other, sharpening their ideas, refining their thinking. But that's not always what happens. In reality, groups of intelligent people often fall into echo chambers, not in spite of their intelligence, but because of it. When you put highly educated, like-minded individuals in the same room, they tend to reinforce each other's views, not challenge them, especially when those views signal status, identity, or belonging. Psychologists call this group polarization. When people with similar beliefs talk to each other, their opinions become more extreme. They don't moderate, they intensify, and smart people are no exception. Take the 2008 financial crisis. The brightest economists, analysts, and bankers were convinced that the system was stable. They built complex models, made confident predictions, reassured each other that their assumptions were sound, and they were all wrong together, not because they lacked intelligence, but because they shared the same blind spots. And no one wanted to be the outsider in a room full of insiders. This kind of intellectual groupthink shows up everywhere. In academia, where certain schools of thought become untouchable. In tech culture, where innovation is praised, but dissent is quietly punished. In politics, where policy advisors speak only to those who share their ideology. And when disagreement does happen, it's often performative, a clash of two opposing camps, each reinforcing their own worldview. No one is listening to understand. They're listening to argue better. What's missing is genuine intellectual diversity. Not diversity of credentials, but diversity of thinking styles, of values, of worldviews. Because without that, intelligence becomes insular. You start to mistake consensus for truth and confidence for correctness. And in elite circles, where reputation is everything, changing your mind becomes risky. Saying, "I don't know," can cost you status. So instead, people double down even when they suspect they're wrong. That's the dark side of brilliance in groups. When everyone's smart and no one's willing to be humble, bad ideas don't get weeded out. They get amplified. This is how entire institutions drift off course, not from stupidity, but from too many smart people saying the same thing to each other for too long. Intelligent people see patterns where others don't. That's part of what makes them brilliant. They can connect dots across space and time. They notice hidden structures, subtle trends, deeper meanings. This ability is powerful, but it's also dangerous. Because the smarter you are, the more likely you are to see patterns that aren't real. There's a word for this: apophenia, the tendency to perceive meaningful connections in random or unrelated data. It's a normal human trait, but in intelligent minds, it becomes hyperactive. Why? Because pattern recognition is rewarding. The brain gets a hit of dopamine when it discovers meaning, and smart people, with their fast, flexible thinking, are constantly scanning for connections. So when the world feels chaotic, they impose structure, even if that structure is imaginary. This is how intelligent people sometimes fall into conspiracy theories. They look at a complex world, full of noise, contradiction, uncertainty, and they build a narrative. Not necessarily because they're paranoid, but because they can. They have the cognitive tools to construct highly detailed, internally consistent models. And once those models are built, they're hard to dismantle, especially when the person who built it sees it as a sign of their unique insight. Consider the case of Ted Kaczynski, the so-called Unabomber, a former math prodigy. with an IQ estimated over 160. He created an elaborate theory about industrial society and human freedom. Some parts were insightful, others were unhinged, but in his mind, the pattern made sense, and that sense of internal logic gave him the conviction to act violently. Now that's an extreme example, but the same mechanism shows up in more everyday forms. Intelligent people may become obsessed with stock market cycles, hidden codes in history, or alternative health systems. They might interpret coincidences as fate or draw meaning from data that isn't statistically significant. Because once a pattern is seen, the brain resists letting it go, especially when ego is involved. And here's the deeper issue: the more educated someone is, the easier it becomes to justify the pattern. They use complex language, niche references, or scientific-sounding logic to defend their interpretation. And from the outside, it all sounds persuasive, but that's the illusion. Being good at explaining something doesn't mean it's true, and being smart enough to build a theory doesn't mean it reflects reality. At some point, the ability to find meaning becomes an addiction, a kind of cognitive overfitting, where intelligence starts serving not truth, but the hunger for significance. And in that state, even the brightest minds can become trapped, not by ignorance, but by imagination. So if intelligence can betray us, if being smart doesn't protect us from bad thinking, then what does? How do we become intelligent in a way that's actually useful? Not just clever, but clear. Not just sharp, but honest. The answer begins with a shift in mindset, because intelligence alone isn't dangerous. Unexamined intelligence is. The first key is something rarely taught in schools: intellectual humility. The willingness to say, "I don't know," to entertain the idea that you might be wrong, to recognize that truth isn't something you dominate, it's something you serve. Counterintuitive, maybe, especially in a world that rewards confidence over accuracy. But humility is not weakness. It's discipline. It's the mental posture that lets you learn, revise, and grow. Second, learn to separate your beliefs from your identity. The more tightly you wrap your ego around your opinions, the harder it becomes to update them. Don't make being smart part of your self-worth, because then being wrong feels like a threat, not a discovery. Third, seek out friction. Not arguments, but thoughtful disagreement. Surround yourself with people who don't always think like you. Read things you disagree with. Listen to ideas that challenge your worldview, not to win, but to learn. Because when you only talk to people who agree with you, you don't sharpen your mind, you just build an echo. Fourth, develop a practice of metacognition, thinking about your thinking. Catch yourself in the act of motivated reasoning. Notice when you're looking for evidence to prove a belief. Instead of test it, ask yourself, if I were wrong, how would I know? Finally, remember that being intelligent doesn't make you more human. It doesn't make you better. It just gives you tools. And those tools can either help you build clarity or help you build delusion. The difference is how you use them. True intelligence isn't just the ability to think quickly or abstractly. It's the courage to look inward, to confront your own blind spots, to let go of brilliant ideas that turned out to be wrong, even when you spent years believing them. Because in the end, the smartest thing you can do is learn how to change your mind. If this made you rethink what intelligence really means, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more deep dives into the parts of human nature we're all still trying to understand. This is Restless Wonder. See you in the next one.